Right. Okay, so people are joining us, and Micah, if you can just wave, say hi. I want to introduce both of you, but I don't know very much about you, just that you were the class of 2020. And the two people with me today, Peter Kahn and Micah Daniels, are part of the group that produced this incredible piece of poetry. It is now the core text in my class this fall for both sections that I teach at the university, because you can see like all the pages I've turned down in the notes. Just this morning, I was writing next to your poem, Micah, What Priscilla Was Like, because this is motivating, inspiring, just absolutely incredible work. So welcome to you both. And Peter, could you start by just telling people a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Peter Kahn. I just finished a 28-year career at Oak Park and River Forest High School, just west of Chicago. And I ran the spoken word program there that I created. And I've also worked and taught in London, England, and developed projects there. And Micah, it was a two-time Poetry Slam team member and was part of our spoken word club, an important leader in the club. And she's now a college student, University of Illinois at Chicago. I'll let her explain what she's studying, as well as the youth leadership work that she does. And along with a former student, Dan Sully Sullivan, and poets who we've worked with, Franny Choi and Hanif Abdur-Rakib, the co-editor of Respect the Mic. Thanks for having us here.
Yay.
Yes, thank you so much. I am so happy to be here. Thank you, Mr. Kahn. I was going to say PK. People who are in spoken word call him PK sometimes just because Peter Kahn. But yes, I was in the spoken word club. I was on our slam team. And for context, for those that may not know, the slam team is our competitive team. So we would write our poems, and then we would compete. And we did pretty well in the competition. So of everything that I've done in my life, being part of those teams have been like top. But I also am, and I'm going to be entering my third year at the University of Illinois at Chicago. So technically a junior. And I am majoring in neuroscience, which is very different than poetry. And it's very different than the current work that I do as well. I'm a research assistant for the University of Illinois. No, I'm a research assistant for the University of Chicago Consortium School on Education. And then I am a youth leadership coach for an organization called the National Equity Project. And those two organizations are in partnership with each other. So there's a lot of work that happens there. But yeah, that is all about me.
I gotta say though, you just listed an amazing bunch of things that you do. And you started by saying the poetry club and the competitions were the two most important things in your experience.
Yeah, I think so, because before I joined those clubs, I really didn't have a strong sense of self. And so I think being in the spoken word club, being on slam team, and being around like so many different kinds of people who seemed very sure of themselves and who they were, it was really overpowering. And I think just really contagious, and that spread onto me. And I also experienced like the most loving and affirming relationships there as well, including relationships with Mr. Kahn. So that was really amazing. So without my experience in that club, I would not feel empowered to speak up or feel like I have a place in trying to create positive change or helping others in the same way that I do right now. So yeah, definitely life-changing experience.
Wow. I mean, it's one thing for us all to buy this, which, can I just say, anybody on this, if you're interested enough to be here, you've got to have a copy of this book. You're going to find that it is all the things. I was reading just the introductions to the different sections, and the beauty of the craft just in those introductions is stunning. But then you can go on the Respect the Mic website and watch all of the young poets reading their work. Imagine using this in your classroom. Day after day, you could introduce a different poet, and they have a little description of what they're doing now, the colleges they're attending, these amazing things they've accomplished, and you could use the poetry with the poet speaking. Wow, what a gift to the world of teaching and learning. And apparently to you as well, Micah.
Definitely.
So Peter, there are going to be people on this thread who are like, how did this start? What do I do? Could I possibly pull this off? What would you say?
Well, for context, when I was a traditional English teacher, my least favorite subject to teach was poetry. I was quite inept at it. And the design of this book and the website was kind of the past me in mind. You know, how could I have taught poetry a lot better? How could I utilize this tool to do so? So the hope is that the poems within the book, and there are 76 of them, some about 40% were written when they were in high school, 3 of whom were 14 when they wrote them. And then the oldest contributor was my co-editor, who was my former student, Dan Sullivan, who was mid-30s when he wrote his poem. He turned 40 in April. And then we have, you know, the other thing is, when I think about myself as a student, I hated poetry. It's my least favorite thing to do in English class. And part of it was I didn't aspire to be any of the poets who we were taught. I didn't want to be a dead white man who wrote about flowers, for instance. So within this book, we have an NBA basketball champion who won Dancing with the Stars, right? Iman Shumpert, who was on, if you watch The Chi, he was just on the season opener of The Chi as well. So he was a part of our program, and he has a poem in there about his aunt's passing. We've got Kara Jackson, who recently opened for Nico Case. She was the National Youth Poet Laureate a couple years after Amanda Gorman, and now she's a singer-songwriter. So yeah, she opened it for Nico Case at Woodstock, and she signed to September Records, Adele's new record label. We've got Langston Kerman, who's a stand-up comedian, who's in the show Bust Down on Peacock, and has been in The Boys. So the cool factor, I guess, is what I'm getting at, of poetry that I found lacking when I was a kid. So if I heard an NBA basketball champion wrote a poem in here, that would get my interest going a little bit. So I think that answers the question, Penny.
That's a really good answer. I'm also curious though, you know, as pretty much everyone on this thread is a full-time teacher. So you just decided to add this in after school. Was that your vision?
So initially, I was on my 6th year as a traditional English teacher. My boss at the time, the head of English, Bob McBride, offered me a release period to run our writing lab at the time. And I said I wasn't interested. And he knew that I'd been revamping the poetry unit the last couple of years and using contemporary poets, particularly of color. And he said, what if I gave you a release period to develop some spoken word programming here? And I said, there you have it. And in the same time, I started the spoken word club, the after school part. But we brought in poets for poets in residence, such as Avery R. Young, who's a phenomenal poet. And then that inspired me after 2 years to go to London and to try to do some programming in London, England, in the lowest performing borough there, the borough of Hackney, and got to work in over 30 schools there with 10 to 16-year-olds and saw how magical poetry was for them. And then we started the London Teenage Poetry Slam the next year in the 3 lowest performing boroughs in England. Again, miraculous stuff. And then that allowed me the cachet to go back to Oak Park and say, hey, I'm done being a traditional English teacher. I have this idea. What do you think? And fortunately, with the support of my boss, my previous boss, Bob, my current boss at the time, Steve Gevinson, the superintendent, Sue Bridge, they said, let's try it. And that's where I became a full-time spoken word educator. And in that role, I'm done with that role, work with every single freshman twice a year, first semester for a week, second semester, and every sophomore for 5 days. So essentially, Micah got 15 days of poetry work with myself and my assistant coming into her English classes. And we're a school of 3,400 students. So one of the beautiful things is pre-COVID, I could tell you if a kid was a transfer student after I finished my first freshman unit, because if I didn't recognize them, I knew they hadn't started school there. So it allowed that with that role as well.
Wow. So what was it like for you, Micah? He's behind the scenes, you're in it.
Yeah. Funnily enough, it didn't really feel that way because I think something that's really significant about the spoken word club is that students have a lot of agency and autonomy. Like I think the rules of the spoken word club are very much like set out. It's a place of respect, for sure. But we're split into small groups led by other students, deciding what they're writing about, deciding how, like what vocal techniques they're going to use, and they're able to make their own schedules for how things are going to work besides like check-in points. And so the Mr. Kahn was the coach and he was our leader, but I feel when I was in that space, I felt like this is a youth space, this is a student space. And the school that I went to, it had a lot of people of color, but often didn't feel that way. And being in the spoken word space, it was like, I don't know, like it felt like the only place in the school where it was representative of all the different identities. So it was super, super awesome to be there. I was able to captain a few teams after my first one, where I was captained. Um, and it was just a fantastic experience. And then even being a captain of a spoken word group, it wasn't like I was a leader and I got to say so, but it was just like, I'm going to be the facilitator in this space and I'm still inviting your input in. It's just a really big group effort where hierarchy doesn't really exist, which I feel like is really important when it comes to spaces with young people and inviting their input in, and to have that opportunity to have it be so close and at the same time build such strong relationships and also work on a really unique art form, which works as an outlet for people who are going through very real things. And I think that a lot of people don't understand the things that young people are going through. But even when I was in that space and I felt like I was going through things, I would meet other students that were at my same age, like students who are homeless or taking care of their families or really struggling with like identity issues, students struggling with addiction or people in their family or loved ones with addiction. And just these huge things they have to carry to school and still be students, but then spoken word really provided them the space to one, be loved and affirmed, but then also like gave them a way to let that out in a really healthy way. And like Mr. Khan was saying, when he brought it back here, because you could see how effective it was in transforming people's lives, it did that exact same thing in spoken word in Oak Park. And I always tell Mr. Khan, like, you probably don't even understand how many lives you've saved, because it just seems like students, just doing their poetry, working in groups, but the things that are happening there, it's just amazingly transformational. So that was my experience.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question? First of all, you see what I'm saying? How lucky was I? I got to work with Micah when she was in high school. Micah, can you tell us what your fear was initially? Because you didn't join Spoken Word Club right off the bat when we came into your English classes. Can you talk about the freshman, sophomore you versus where you are now?
Yeah. So I'm like an extremely anxious person. I still am very anxious. But I had like never done anything alone in my life. And so I had always been interested in poetry. I had always kept my eyes on the spoken word club in my freshman year and my sophomore year. And I went for one or two meetings with my friend my freshman year, but then he was like, you know what, like, I don't know, maybe I'm not feeling it. I don't think I'm going to come back. So then I was like, oh, well, that's it for me too. I'm not going to come back. And then my junior year, I had a friend that I literally begged to go with me because I didn't want to lose this experience. And so she went with me for like two meetings again. And then she was like, you know what, I actually have a lot on my plate right now. I don't think I can do this. And so I had to come to that decision, like, okay, am I going to let my anxiety take over and not let me participate in what I think could be a really good experience? Or am I going to try to do this alone? And so I decided to stay, and it was the best thing ever. But I was definitely just intimidated when I first came because I was so used to people not understanding who they were and not, being sure of themselves or feeling like they had the space to share a voice loudly. And so I think when I first went into that space, I felt like there was no way I could do this alone, but that was just like the complete opposite. It was like, it's just the perfect place to go when you really have no one, because there are people there who will welcome you. And so like I when I went into new spaces, I literally did not speak. When I first joined Slam Team, um I didn't talk for a long time. Like, of course, if people talk to me, I would say something back, but I would not just like talk. But eventually I did. And I also spoke really quietly. I'm still a pretty soft-spoken person, but that was when I was really able to like hone into my leadership skills and feel confident in them for like the very first time, for real.
Wow. What a story, because I think the story that is told about students with anxiety is that they can't. And you were simply saying that, at least what I heard was there was a journey between I can't, which you also believed, to I need someone to be with me, to the place is so welcoming, I can do it up by myself. And now, of course, you are a leader helping other students to make those transitions, which I think is what we all desire for every kid. What a story. So Michael, would you read us one of your poems? I know you have one in the collection, but you also have one that you've been working on recently, right?
I do. Do you mind if I ask PK, which one do you think that I should read first?
I'd say, may she read both, Penny?
Of course.
Okay.
We're here for it.
I would go the one from the anthology first, followed by your other one.
Okay, awesome. So here I have my own copy of Respect the Mic.
I'm following along.
Awesome. I will turn to mine. So mine is titled What Priscilla Was Like, and it's after another poem called Should Have Been Jimmy Savannah by Patricia Smith. So What Priscilla Was Like. My dad told me he wanted to name me after Priscilla, the Black woman who mothered my granny. Books probably fit her fingers the same way regret sat comfortably on my father's tongue. She had artificial curls long as a pinky and a home in Tennessee. Lived her life scared of white people with pink skin that threatened to make brown skin turn red skin. She begged my granny, who then was just Barbara, to be careful on Saturday nights, to pull down her dress so the boys down the street didn't get any ideas. Priscilla wore slippers, made rough from too many cracked sidewalks and threadbare rugs. She was never afraid to bend the slippers into a weapon, one that had my granny look past her last life, trying to wiggle out the best mistakes that warranted a slipper beating, the taste of concrete and fraying cloth. Priscilla's voice boomed out intimidation, and it made up for fragile bones she passed on to Granny and showed up opposite in the new Priscilla, correctly named Micah, with a salted difference of time zones and a mother too light to bring me Priscilla's death. Sometimes I imagine Priscilla is like me, determined but afraid, pessimism a feature in her mind. Her teeth would come in crooked and backward, branding self-conscious into her spine, and trying every day not to slouch. She would be afraid of the step she would take until death, and wished heaven was like Neverland. She would be in love with a boy that will never love her back because he reminded her of a time she was happy. She would have no rhythm and would love dancing anyway, would talk in cursive lowercase sarcasm and be asked repeatedly to slow down, speak up, and be nice. I wonder if my father loved Priscilla for these reasons, or if he loved her in spite of them. I hope he loves me more. I dream of Priscilla every night, and each time she's different, but always more beautiful. That's the first one. And then the second one, also connected to my father. I wrote this one, I think, when I was like 16. And then I wrote this one I'm about to read originally when I was, I think, 18, and then revised it a couple of months ago. So I think it really shows kind of the parental journey that happens in people's lives. But this poem is titled, I Think I Hate My Dad. So I think I hate my dad. And I also hate how hate is always told it's a strong word. I want to tell my dad I hate him, and he knows it means only for today, only for this week, only for as long as he says hurtful things like he's reciting the alphabet. I want to say I hate my father, and he knows I mean I want his shoelaces to untie every 16 steps, or he burps in the middle of a conversation with his boss, or the button of his favorite shirt pops off, and it's the one right in the middle. And he tries to wear it anyway. But he notices people's eyes gazing down and looking at his circular stomach poking out from the hole without a button. I want to say I hate my dad, and for him to know that I'm still grateful that he makes me dinner every night and lets my boyfriend come over and stay for hours, even though he hates company, and puts my clothes in the dryer when I leave them in the washing machine. I want to tell my dad I hate him, so it stings enough that his mouth stays shut. Or maybe it nips at him just enough so he calls his sister and asks her how to fix things with me. I think telling him I hate him will be the only thing that will make him apologize sincerely. And if that doesn't change him, I might hate him in the way that sticks. I want to tell my dad I hate him in the same way I say I hate carrots, that I'll avoid them most of the time, but when they're placed in front of me with some ranch dressing, I might take a nibble. I might take a bite, put a couple of them in my hand if they're the little ones, maybe keep them in my pocket to snack on later or share them with a friend. I might even ask my mom to put them on the grocery list. I hate how hate is said to be so serious. It's not so serious to me. I hate socks with holes in them, but if only one out of the pair has a hole, I'll still wear them. I hate my hair on most days, but if someone were to shave it, I would hate that person more than any hair I ever had. And I hate my dad, but only for today, although I hated him yesterday too. And I might hate him tomorrow, but I hope it won't be longer than a week. That's that. Yeah.
Wow. You give me a whole new way to think about that word and about my own father. I love that.
Thank you.
So you said there was this journey kind of, and the difference in your father in the two poems. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I feel like for a lot of teenagers, there's like, you have friction with your parents when you're growing up. That was definitely evident in my life for sure. But my dad and we have very different views. I come from a very strict household, a very Christian household. And I think I'm a pretty Christian person myself, but definitely not in the same way as my parents. And there's also I feel like there's so many things that come with, just being a man in society. Like it's hard, to express yourself in ways that are healthy, and in ways that are not told, make you less of a human being or less than a man. And there are some things that just these misogynistic ideals that are really just you can't help sometimes but believe. And so I feel like just growing up, there were times in our relationship where we really butt heads, but the love that was there, it's I knew that he really wanted my love and I knew that I always wanted his. And so there were times where we had good moments, but times when we really had not good ones. And that's still always ebbing and flowing to this day. But so both of my parents really live in my poetry and my experience and growing up in their household and growing up as a Black girl in Oak Park. But yeah, I hope that our relationship can be accurately depicted through my poetry, and maybe other people can relate, to relationships that are a bit more complicated and complex. But there's still love that can be there and still room for growth and change and developing. So yeah.
So well said. Wow. So I am so struck by the fact that both of you and this 20 years of poets that have come out of spoken word have experienced something that other students don't experience with poetry. I would say, and I don't have data for this, but most students in high school do not get an experience like this. Do you think that's true, Peter?
Unfortunately, yeah, I do. And one of my missions now, as I'm moving on to the next stage of my career, is to try to get the programming we did in Oak Park and will continue doing without me there into as many schools as possible. And when I was just in London, I sent you the pictures, in fact, Penny.
Yeah.
And I went to a spoken word showcase at a school that I first worked with in 2002.
Mhm.
And that programming is, the leadership has changed over the years, but a guy named Christian Foley, who apparently does his rap lessons on TikTok and has millions of followers. And BBC TV is doing a documentary about him, in fact. And he works in juvenile prisons, does all this incredible community work, but he still comes back to the school. It's called Cardinal Pole Secondary School. But even them, they've seen the benefit of it, but because of, in England, the standardized test is called the GCSE. Because of the looming GCSE, it's not in the classrooms as much as it should be even there.
It is presented, at least by Micah, as life-changing. Like, what possible test could be as important as that? I mean, Micah, what I heard you say was not just the study of words and language and trying to create something that would show the complexity of these relationships, but the very belonging and confidence and person you found by doing this work. And so part of why I wanted to have you on was to perhaps inspire teachers to want to add this to the curriculum. And it's not, my students read poetry like this, listen to spoken word almost every single day they're in class, and they write imitations of it. And they will say the same exact thing. It changes the way they think about language, about ideas, about expression. But even more so to create poetry teams and competition and captains. What else do we need to say let's change what we're doing with poetry so more young people find themselves?
Micah, you want to go first or second?
I can go first because I feel like you could give maybe a better informed answer, maybe. But
I don't know.
I think for me, just coming from the student perspective, it is a difficult task, I think, to bring poetry in because, for one, I think a lot of students have preconceived notions about it. Kind of, Mr. Kahn was touching on that. But I think in the way that PK and his assistants had throughout the years bringing it into classrooms, they did a really good job by, one, showing a number of examples. And this is from my own memory and also some that I saw a little bit my senior year because I was a teacher's assistant in a class where they were doing the poetry lessons again, which I felt thankful for having the opportunity to sit in. But I think giving students choice, I think because young people are so often not given choice in their classrooms, that if we say like, okay, we really want you to participate, we know that you would do fantastic, you have a voice that should be heard, but you get to say what you want, you get to say at the end of the day if you want to participate, and we're going to give you the resources that you need to better your craft. I think is really an amazing way to do so. And I think just getting other people to understand how effective spoken word and poetry can be is by showing them things like the Oak Park Spoken Word Club, or showing them the Respect the Mic or the website. I'm so happy that we have this resource now to show to other, educational institutions. And if you can get in touch with PK, I don't know how possible that is. I have no idea. He makes himself very available to me. But I think, as you can tell from this large array of stories he has, just to share that with other people, I think would be transformational if they're trying to figure out how can we get poetry in this space. But I think just technicality wise, like when it comes to just more skill with words and structure, and just with the English language, it does a lot of work. And so if you're trying to kind of convince people to bring it into the classroom, and you have to talk more about the educational piece of it, and less about like the social emotional learning, just really going like really highlighting how working on a written piece over and over again and going over edits and getting other people's input can really improve your writing skills. So I think that's also an important technique that could be used. But I'll pass it to you, PK.
So piggybacking to answer the question directly, what I found in the UK and the United States outside of our school is that standardized testing, it's very difficult and messy to measure creativity, right? And to measure creative writing. So therefore schools just go with, how can we raise our test scores? We can't measure this, so we're not going to pay attention to it. And in London, the last time I lived and worked there, we were based in a school, and every once in a while they'd cancel one of our lessons because they had prep for maths, as they call mathematics, right? And that took precedent. And what Mike is saying, just it didn't seem to matter to them, even when they saw it transform some of their students. So what I'm up against in Ohio in part is that that curricular time is so precious, and for whatever reason, even though this is gold, people are looking at it as like a pile of dirt, and they're afraid to dig it up. They're just going to go with what they know. Would it be possible to share my screen, Penny? Because
Sure.
I saw some questions in the
post.
chat. Okay. But I
Yeah,
want to show you this website, because the other thing is on the website, besides the videos for most of the contributors, we also have impact statements.
Mhm.
Thank you. And I want to show you that as a way of getting administrators and students to buy into this. So hopefully you can see that. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. Right. So here's the Respect the Mic page. And let's say you click on Kaylin, who is an educator now. So what you have is her video of her poem from the anthology, right? So you can hear her talk a
Hi,
little
my
bit
name is
about that,
Kaylin Stewart, and this is my poem titled Birth.
right? But also it talks about her writing process and whatnot. But here you have extended bio and then the impact of poetry and spoken word club. Some of these are quite long, right? And we also have favorite poets or lyricists. And for people who are asking, how can we develop this? We also have writing prompts that my former assistant, Christian Robinson, and I put together with at least 2 or 3 writing prompts for every poem in the book, even if there isn't a video there. But for how to start the club, I know there was a question in the chat. On this website, we also have about the club, et cetera, but these showcase videos, a whole archive of videos from not going back all the way to 1999, but going back to 2014, right? So you got a lot of stuff to choose from here. You have a good friend of Micah's, Brianna Henry, talking about, for part of the senior montage, how poetry transformed her life, and so on and so forth. And then there's more stuff here. So this website is free, and I think it could be a really powerful resource. And then the other thing, just to answer one of the questions in the chat, is that okay, Penny?
Sure.
Yeah. So one of the questions was how to make it accessible to reluctant students. So I'll tell you the trick that I tried when I was a traditional English teacher. So let's say I'd assign a prompt and kids would write. I'd say, all right, we're going to have 3 rounds of sharing. We're going to start with the anonymous round. So as long as at least 2 of you want to do the anonymous round, you'll hand me your paper. I'll shuffle them up. I'll read it aloud, and I won't say who wrote it. And then the second round will be, I'll read it, but I'll say, this is Micah's poem, but I'm reading it from Micah. And then the courageous round is you're going to get up and read it yourself, right? And you do that a few times, and what happens is most of the anonymous people reveal themselves, because your students are going to be like, wow, that was awesome. Who wrote that? And they'll raise their hand. Yeah, that was me. And before you know it, you don't need the anonymous round anymore, because kids see that it's a safe environment and that maybe they have something they didn't know they had in them. So there's a long answer to a short question, Penny.
It's funny though, I started a poetry elective at my high school, and my department chair at the time said, nobody likes poetry. Nobody's going to take this course. And of course, what they did in guidance was put all the kids who didn't like English class in the course. it was great because poetry, like if you teach it with spoken word, they were all in, right? So we had 50 kids the first semester and 109 signed up for the second. So now they were worried because other people who didn't want to teach it were going to have to teach it, right? Or else I was going to teach poetry all day, which wouldn't have been bad. But the thing that I noticed the most that Micah, I'd love for you to comment on is that because my students wrote poetry, all of their writing improved. It is my pushback to, we have to keep teaching to a test because all writing improves with the study of language and form and meaning and, you know, all of the things you said. What would you say to that?
I would say that that is an amazing experience that I'm so glad that you had and your students had. But not surprising. I think like it's definitely true that working on poetry over and over, just because I feel like it's writing skills and also creativity skills, and then you're looking at a lot at structure. And then if you have other kinds of writing, just essay writing, which is also really structure based and really, really relevant and present in schools, that will just bleed into that kind of writing as well. And I saw just being a captain with the my fellow peers that I was helping, they came in with a poem that was like, okay, sometimes it was really good, but they would always leave with a poem that was like 500% better. And if I ever got a chance to read their poetry after, they were able to take those skills and apply it to their poetry. And just with personal relationships that I have with people who did spoken word, I know that it also improved their writing in just their English classes or their history classes as well. And it also just really helped to alleviate the pressure because funnily enough, I think that when people struggle with writing, they have this idea of what a piece of writing is supposed to look like, or they have like the finished product in their mind and they put a lot of pressure on themselves. And I think that also can happen with poetry and that can also happen with spoken word, but something that I learned while being in the club is something that I also tried to teach to the people in my group was by saying like, this is literally a piece of writing for you. Like the only person that you have to impress while you're writing this is yourself. And you have so much time to go over this and fix it. Like we're going to spend so much time editing it, but like, this is literally a piece for you. And you don't have to feel any kind of pressure. It's not supposed to look any certain kind of way. This is just a piece of writing that is supposed to represent you and the things that you want to talk about. And I think that really trying to put work into alleviating that pressure instead of having them like think like I cannot write anything that is up to the status that I want it to be, it made it a lot simpler to write. And I think that when it comes to other forms of writing, that people also apply that same pressure onto themselves, that helped alleviate that as well. But I know that writing poetry, that was something that I struggle with and still struggle with as well, like that pressure of, oh my God, this needs to be a good piece. But then when I just ground myself and remind myself, like, who is this for? Like, of course, if it's able to touch others, that would be a fantastic result. But when I'm writing this right now, it is for me and only me. And I think it really makes a difference.
Okay, I just want to mention that neuroscientists can be teachers. And could you please become a teacher? Because what you just said, like if I could give the sound of what you said to every one of my students, it was beautiful. Maybe you can be a teacher on the side, maybe a little bit, spoken word night.
Maybe so.
God, it's just so fabulous to listen to you. One of my students this fall said, Miss Kittle, even my emails are better. They're better than they were before I started writing so much poetry. I swear it transfers. Peter, any last thoughts? Did we miss any questions? Because we're coming up on the end.
Let's see. When looking at the chat, there was a question about Brandon Leak. And did that impact our students? I gotta say, no one brought that up with me. Amanda Gorman had some influence on us, but not Brandon Leak. And I think, you know, Kendrick Lamar winning a Pulitzer and taking the craft of writing so seriously, I think he has helped our cause quite a bit. When I started the club, it was Mos Def and Talib Kweli were really important to my students, and they took the craft of writing really seriously. And I used striking lines from their songs to point out simile and metaphor and personification and whatnot. And that's another suggestion I have, is utilizing music lyrics. in the classroom, again, with the quote unquote cool factor. That certainly helps. But no, I would just say that I hope, I appreciate everybody who's here, and I hope you give it a try and utilize that website. And if you have a fear about teaching poetry like I did, there's a lot of ready-made stuff there. It seems like some of you are already doing amazing work. I hope this complements it. And one of the things, we just did a reading in Manchester, England, a virtual reading. And one of my mentors and friends, Malika Booker, who's a really important writer in England, she talked about how when she goes in to do workshops, she's teaching poetry written by adults. And, it's hit or miss as a result. But with respect to Mike, again, 40% of them, they were written while they were in high school, and none of them were older than 35. And a lot of those issues are pertinent to their lives right now. So it's a nice way in. And again, with that website, you have ready-made writing prompts that you could build off of as well. So, Penny, I really appreciate, again, this is the second time you've worked with us and trumpeted this. So very much appreciate it. And, I wish all of you really good luck, enjoying the summer, and then good luck next school year. The profession's getting harder and harder, so we need you.
You guys are both awesome. Will you just give us something you're currently reading? This is Book Love, after all, the Book Love Foundation. We believe in a love of books, and we want to know, poets or not, what are you reading?
Well, I anticipated that question. So I just got back from England. So I picked up books at Waterstones and other bookstores there. So this book is by a friend of mine who's worked with our student. His name is Anthony Joseph, and it's Sonnets for Albert. It's about his father. That's a picture of his father at Maracas Beach in Trinidad. And Anthony's Trinidadian British. He's a musician as well. And this book was just one of the finalists for the Forward Book Prize, one of the two most prestigious prizes. And it's beautifully written. Then one of my former grad students who Mike has got to work with, named Raymond Antrobus. This is his second book. His first one won a bunch of prizes. So I'm just started reading this one. He's a phenomenal writer. And then Victoria is the first woman of color to ever be published by Faber and Faber, one of the top publishing houses over there. And it's also going to be published by Knopf here in the States.
Wow.
And I got to see, I've known her since she was a teenager. She's now a mom. And I got to go to her reading with Raymond, in fact, a couple of weeks ago and hear poems from this. If you're a fan of Dinez Smith, who I was just interacting with, there are some poems that seem inspired by Dinez in this book. So those would be three. And then there's one other book that I just highly recommend. Hold on a second. I think I got it. This is Jacob Ross. He's a Grenadian writer and used to be a professor. And this book, and if you know Carol Jago, I recommended this to her when I read it, and she absolutely loved it as well. It is a detective novel set in the island of Grenada, but the use of dialect and dialogue, it kind of reminds me, I don't want to compare anyone to Toni Morrison, but there's poetry within the prose. And if you like Sewell or Song of Solomon in particular, kind of reminded me of Song of Solomon. In terms of the great, compelling plot. It's a page turner, but the language is so rich. So I'll hand it over to you, Micah.
I definitely don't have as many books as that, but I just finished reading Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler, and now I'm reading Parable of the Talents. So those books are really good, really interesting. I'm really getting into like science fiction kind of right now, like kind of like the dystopian kind of books. And so Octavia Butler is like a fantastic sci-fi writer, a black woman, amazing. And there's a lot of parallels right now with like the political climate, which is pretty wild because it was written in the 90s. And like a couple months ago, I read All About Love by Bell Hooks, just coming back to it. And ever since that, like, I think when I read it the first time, it wasn't when I was in like in a mature enough of a headspace to have it really mean something to me. But now it means like everything. I can feel it like changing just the way that I want to engage with the world in every way. So I just come back to that like every day. And then I really want to shout out someone who I worked with from I met them through Spoken Word Club. Their name is Nue Foster. I did kind of like a poetry apprenticeship with them called Bomb Squad. PK, you could talk about that too if you wanted. But they were I think the 2020 National Youth Poet Laureate. And so, or Chicago National Youth Poet Laureate. And so their book just came out. It's called Waning by Nue Foster. So I haven't read it myself, although I'm going to read it very soon. I just want to make sure that other people get their eyes on it too.
Wow. What a collection. Now, have you looked at the graphic novels of Octavia Butler? Somebody has turned them into graphic novels. We studied one last year. Unbelievable. I saw it in an entirely new way. And I can't remember the title of the one we read last summer, but there is some very cool work being done with her work, which is and just incredible.
That is awesome. I will definitely have to check it out.
Yeah. You guys, this has been such a gift. Our first day of book club, you have started us off with such joy, and I am in awe of both of you. So thank you for your time, for your poetry, for your love of what language can mean for kids.
Thanks so much. We're in awe of you, and we really appreciate you having us. It's an honor.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm going to end the recording, and people are going to